Hi, I'm Ria.
Hi, I'm Yuli, and together we are
Chronicles of a Spoonie,
sharing stories,
creating connections. Today we have a lovely lady joining us. Her name is Ruth, and she's actually a friend of ours. She's coming in today to discuss mental health. Now, we are going to be going into some deep talk here, so we have some trigger warnings.
Yeah, so as Ria said, we do like to give trigger warnings as always. So this is quite a heavy-hitting episode, and we don't go into specifics, but we do discuss trauma, along with some self-harm, obviously mental illnesses that come along with that, suicide, and there is a brief mention of rape in there as well. So just if this is something that would potentially trigger you, please do consider listening to this before you continue. And if it's not the one for you, you can always come back for our next episode, but we hope to see you soon if that's the case.
With those trigger warnings being said, we will be covering BPD, also known as EUPD, anxiety, complex trauma, also known as complex PTSD. So yeah, with that said, let's get her in. So today we are here with Ruth. Ruth is somebody we actually do know. It's one of our little friends. Ruth, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Ruth. You can tell from my accent, possibly. I'm from Scotland, in the Central Belt, round about Glasgow. I live with my husband, Ian, who's sitting next to me, keeping me calm or making fun of me, one of the two. Keeping me plied with coffee, which is always helpful. Mm-hmm. I work part-time with a charity that I've worked for many years, and I love it. Due to my illnesses, though, I can only do part-time at the moment. Mm-hmm. And my husband works, funnily enough, in COVID response, and we're both got COVID at the moment. I've just dated the podcast by saying that. Anyway, we both actually love doing lots of crafts and things together. We're sitting in our craft room at the moment. And I also love doing lots of Lego with my amazing nephew, who's 5, actually about to be 6 in a couple of weeks. Yeah, that's probably enough.
I've actually seen your Lego pieces, and I have to say they are like mind-blowing. They're not just like your little car piece, like cars that you build together, or a little house. You're talking like Disney castles and ships, and like it's amazing. Like they are amazing.
And the most recent one was the typewriter. That's really fun.
Wow.
I kind of typewriter, yeah. I pretend that I buy them for my nephew, but he doesn't really like to follow instructions, which is cool. He just loves building loads and loads of things out of his own imagination, but I like to follow the instructions. So I buy kits that are technically for him. You can see the Hogwarts castle behind me. Mm-hmm. But he never got it. I just built it. And once it's been up for a wee while, we'll break it all down and he can build whatever he wants with the bricks.
You was telling me the other day that there's this place you can go to online and buy a new pattern,
yes,
and rebuild them into something else.
That's quite fun, because I just took down all my friends' sets, so I'm going to remake them into something else.
Oh god, I can't wait to see that. You did flowers, didn't you? Was it earlier last year, wasn't it?
Yeah, I did dabble in a wee bit of paper flowers. They're all right. Crochet is my big hobby. I really love crochet. Although you wouldn't know it, because in lockdown I did none, and I literally just got my newest nephew's baby blanket to him, and he's now 1.5 years. I said it'll still do him for like a little throwover for a nap. Yeah. But at least all 3 nephews have their baby blanket made by their auntie.
Absolutely. I mean, my nieces and nephews are up to the age of 8, and I've been making them bedroom signs since they were born.
Oh, nice. Yes.
So don't worry, you're not the only one that is a little delayed in getting them their gifts.
They normally get it for their
That's the thing. After they're born, you have to keep it going. You should make the commitment. Once you've done one for one of the kids, you've got no choice.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. They're all boys, so lots of fun.
It is lots of fun. It is. But we have a lot of conditions to get through today, and some are rather sensitive. So as always, you can take breaks when you want to take breaks. you know, halt when you want to halt. This is about you today. So let's just take it easy and I guess start from the beginning. Like where for you did the mental health start? Like what was the, I think, is it catalyst? The domino that Hayley calls it, the domino, the starting domino that started the rest of them falling. Where did it all begin for you?
Well, when we were speaking beforehand, you said, oh yeah, you've got quite a few conditions. And I'm like, have I? Because I just wrote down notes for one, but I forgot about the other ones. Not that they're, I just not very good at labeling myself, like okay. I suppose, which is it's fine because I don't really like being defined by labels.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And it can be detrimental sometimes, and sometimes it's good, but
it is. It is, but for yourself, don't worry about your notes. Like so much for this minute. Like for you personally, where do you feel like your mental health started?
Well, mental illness started. Yeah. I've only just realised maybe in the last few years that the catalyst was when I was a very small toddler, like a 3.5-year-old, 4-year-old, and a traumatic event that happened there that my brain remembered but didn't bring it into my consciousness until a lot later on. I suppose I'd had nightmares and things like that over the years, and different things would trigger it, but I had the kind of, I always say I haven't really had many mental health issues, but then when I go look over the past, I go, well, I was diagnosed at 16, 17 with they called it borderline personality disorder back then. They now call it emotionally unstable personality disorder. I don't like any of them, either of the names, either of the labels. And borderline personality gets an awful lot of a bad rap for, my personality is not disordered. No. My personality is me, and this is how I have evolved. And there's things that I need help with.
Right.
So yeah, I had a bit of a struggle as a teenager. Again, a few traumatic things went on that kind of started off a kind of self-harm and depression, anxiety kind of things. And I think at that time, if you got self-harm on your list, they just go, oh, BPD, there's a wee label for you. But I think I was about 16, 17 when they labelled me with that. And I always remember my mum saying to me something like, later on, she told me, basically my parents were told, don't ask her about anything, don't push her. There's probably some sort of trauma in the background there that she doesn't know about, she doesn't remember. But don't push her on it. Now looking back, I'm like, what kind of professional advice is parents not to try and talk to the child about what's wrong and what's going on and things? But I don't think at that time I would actually have been able to articulate what was going on anyway. I didn't really know. I just kept thinking, I feel all these bad things. I feel depressed. I get really anxious about things, but I don't understand why. And nobody could really give me an answer. But again, they're not mind readers, so they didn't know what was going on in my head at the time.
So was that the first diagnosis you had received, was the BPD/EUPD? Is that the first kind of diagnosis in quotation marks that they'd given you?
Yeah, I think it's my first formal one. I think I'd probably been given some antidepressants a couple of years before, maybe by the GP type thing. Yeah, so but that, I think that's the first diagnosis that I had over at the kind of adolescent unit. But then I hit 18 and it all stops because you change to adult services and there's no there was zero handover or anything like this. But yeah, that was my first kind of diagnosis, the first point of. But when I look back over life and I look back over certain memories I have, I can see traits of distress and kind of trauma keeping throughout different bits, things that just you think back and you think at the time is normal, and you look back and you go, that's not actually how everybody experiences things. things like dissociation. That I'm 38 now, and it was only a couple of years ago that I was told about that's what some of the things I experience are. And actually, I realised I've been experiencing that since a little child. Bouts on and off, not in any great way that kind of, I don't know how to describe that. But anyway, I've been experiencing it from a child, on and off.
I guess it's hard whenever, especially as a child, you're not going to have a conversation with somebody about, do you dissociate, and you're not going to know what that is when you're a child either. So how are you ever going to be able to convey that in a conversation to somebody to figure out if that is normal or not? Because you're never going to have anything else to compare it to.
Yes. It was particularly the feeling. I remember kind of walking home from school, and home life was a bit stressful at this point. I had a kind of a grandfather with dementia, and it was challenging living with him. But I remember kind of walking home from school and getting to the door or the driveway of my house, and just feeling like my head was kind of spaced out. It felt like I was going lightheaded, and it was like this kind of pull. And I just thought, that's just something that you experience. But later in life, when more traumatic memories came back and things like that, that became a more prominent symptom that I experienced. But I had experienced it way back as a child, I suppose. But what happened a few years ago was I was living near Glasgow at the time, and Ian and I had been saving up for a house, and we moved kind of half an hour away from where we were living. Now, I had lived in the same place in the same little town for 35 years, like for the whole of my life, and we suddenly moved half an hour away, which doesn't sound like very far, but in my head when we actually moved, oh my word, it was the other side of the world.
Yeah.
I had already had a bit of a breakdown the kind of 2 years before that, and I had just got back to work, and we'd got the mortgage obviously, and but when we moved, so the move also took us to a different health board.
Okay.
So when I started struggling in our new health board, I was picked up by, when I was struggling with my mental health, I was picked up by the kind of different teams that were here. Because back in my old health board in near Glasgow, they had said to me when I had the breakdown, they just wanted to give me diazepam. They said, we'll put a referral into psychology for you, which they did, and then psychology refused it because they said I had to get more stable. So basically, they said, go get more stable, then come back to us and we'll see if we can work with you. Here's some diazepam. So yeah, that was really helpful.
I'm sorry. Get yourself more stable before you get psychiatric help. I mean,
yeah.
Is that not counterintuitive? Is that not the entire point of?
I mean, I've heard that. You hear that all the time. Psychological services can't work with you, and I understand it to a certain extent, but there needs to be a intermediary step there from services to help you get more stable to be able to do the hard work that you need to do, that if you're up for doing it. So when I moved health boards, I had been admitted to A&E, through A&E, and I had an assessment in the I can't remember what you call it, the intensive home treatment team at the hospital. Basically, instead of admitting you into a hospital ward, you stay at home and they visit you each day, and phone calls and all that, and you've got support 24/7. And they just kind of like jumped into action almost. I'd never had any input like that before. And as well as kind of dealing with a crisis at the time, they started to like help me learn some skills a wee bit and stuff like this. There was several more crises around that time as well, and actually I think I've been incredibly fortunate because I know people can wait for support for years, but I was allocated a CPN in my local community mental health unit, and he was absolutely brilliant, and started helping me trying to get some treatment and things, and it's followed on, and I'm still in treatment in my local area. they ended up offering me DBT, dialectical behavioural therapy, which I've been doing for, well, 2 years because COVID got in the middle. And there wasn't anything happening for a year. And then they're referring me onto the trauma service afterwards. But it was like night and day. I couldn't believe that one health board just said, away you go, get stable, and then come back, and psychology might be able to do something. And then over here, they just had the whole pathway set up. And I know I'm incredibly fortunate to have been picked up by them, I think, and got onto that pathway. I think there's a lot of people, and it's, on reflection, it's, if I hadn't been in such a crisis situation or repeatedly, I wouldn't have got onto it. And it's annoying and frustrating that you have to be in crisis before you can get some actual real solid input. But then also they don't have the resources as well in mental health. But it's all a catch-22. But for me, I'm incredibly grateful that I would not have got this support, and I might not be here today if I hadn't moved to this area and been able to get the support that they've put in place for me. And just so happened I got an absolutely amazing CPN, and in DBT I got an amazing therapist. And I mean, it's hell on earth going through DBT. Yes. And I'm not entirely looking forward to the trauma therapy work, which is in the next 6 months or so.
When did the complex PTSD diagnosis come about? Was that recent, or?
Yeah. So that was brought about by my change, moving to this new area.
Okay.
And being seen by a psychiatrist here in the community. And the people that I met in the home treatment team, there was 2 guys who were in particular that I saw a couple of times, and it was them that I first kind of disclosed some of the trauma and some of the experiences of dissociation that I was having. Like just now, I didn't know it, that's what it's called at the time. I was brave enough. Eventually I was desperate enough, I think, to be completely open with somebody and say, this is what I'm experiencing. Please don't lock me up, which they never did, thankfully. But because I was able to disclose things to them, and then kind of bit by bit was able to disclose more to my kind of CPN, and then the psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist again I have here is absolutely wonderful. And she added on this history of complex trauma to my, I think I probably still do have the diagnosis of EUPD on there. And I'm not, and they know that I don't agree with it. I don't like that label. But by them adding on the complex trauma to my diagnosis, then I was happy with that, because it took me so long. I didn't remember some of the trauma from the earliest trauma. I remember I'm 3.5, and I remember like bits of it, but it took me about a year or so to have been remembering it and to actually confirm some of the facts of what I saw and what I remembered, and then to actually admit to myself and somebody else that what happened. And nobody would have had any clue about what happened. My parents had no control over it. It was nothing to do with family or anything. But because I was able to I felt safe enough and supported enough here by the CPNs and that, I was able to disclose that, and then that kind of really opened. That then made it 100 times worse, because I then had to deal with the memories and all the different things, which I haven't really dealt with. I mean, we've been here for 3 years now, and I'm only just touching the surface of admitting, being able to say this is what happened and that's what happened and this is what I'm experiencing. And I've had 38 years of coping with it, whether I was aware I was coping with it or not. A lot of the time I wasn't, but a lot of the behaviours that get labelled under the EUPD diagnosis, quite often people get called willful and attention seeking and destructive behaviours, or therapy interfering behaviours, things like this. these kind of behaviors are trauma responses. I had to keep on at that when I was first validated. Validation was huge at first. When I was first validated, saying, yes, we understand you've experienced these things. You don't need to tell, you got your pace kind of thing. And but when that was validated and the trauma was validated, it was so much, I was going to say easier, but it wasn't. But it gave me the space to be able to say, this is what I'm experiencing and stuff.
But the one thing about the brain is it's such a clever thing that when we go through extremely traumatic events, our brain kind of like covers us and goes, okay, I've got it here, but you're not ready right now. Like you've got an idea something's going on, but I'm not going to give you the full whack right now. And then it kind of goes, something else has happened. Here, have me. Here you go. Dump it on you now. I'm sorry, I can't. I've got to hold this one now. So you get to deal with this, and I'm going to hold this one for you. Do you remember that moment for yourself? Like, do you remember when your brain kind of went, it's here, now deal with it? Like,
I remember maybe it was like, I think it's about 2 years before we moved, maybe a year and a half. Something had been said to me fairly innocently, and it just triggered something, and I felt like the ground had been whipped away from my feet. And for about a couple of years, I just felt like I was walking in sinking sand all the time. I couldn't ground myself. I was grasping at straws, grasping at whatever kind of coping strategies I could find that helped in any sort of way, even if it was a destructive one. If it alleviated what was going on in my head, it was productive. Right. in my mind. Once we moved here and I got a lot more validation and I kind of started to learn a bit more, I like to research and I like to know what the truth of a situation is. Yeah. I like to think that I can always get to the truth and what the real thing is, but you never can. But I did a lot of research and things on trauma and memories and things. And a lot of it's really hard to read because you're like, no, that's not me. No, yeah. No, that's not me. But when I remember reading about, or being told and then reading about how your brain stores trauma, and now I'm going to have to remember. So traumatic situation happens, two people can go through it and one can be traumatized and one might not be. It just depends on, and one's not good or bad, and one's not right or wrong. It's just how your brain has processed it and how you've been able to process it. But trauma memories most of the time will get stored in the amygdala, but they get in the amygdala, it stores all the emotion with it and all the kind of what was going on at the time, and those feelings and emotions are stored with it. Whereas everyday memories, am I right in saying hippocampus? I don't know. I can't remember now. I think the other bit is the hippocampus, where it stores like everyday memories, which don't really have any emotions and stuff like that attached to them. It's just, this is what happened yesterday, and this is what, it's like a filing system. So when I started to realize some triggers that would happen, if somebody was talking about a subject, and all of a sudden I would start to feel panicked and start to dissociate or struggle with something, that was the bit of my brain that held the trauma throwing back into me, the panic and the I can't get out of this situation, like reliving a situation, even though I wasn't sure what's trauma memory. It was even though I didn't even realize it was trauma that was being brought up in my mind. That experience of panic, of fear, of not being in control, of not being able to escape something. I remember that coming, and once I started to understand how those different things were stored and why I kept thinking I was in that situation again. Yeah. Or even if I didn't know what situation it was relating to, why I felt like there was something horrific happening right now. I started to get a bit more understanding. That's all as far as I've got with that, though. It hasn't stopped yet. I haven't gone through trauma therapy to process things. And I can quite easily tell you that's how I understand it now. in reality, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference yet.
No. And I remember, I've actually you explaining how the brain works, stuff like that. I actually have a memory of being told that, yeah, that one that holds everything, it even holds the sense of smells that you smelt at the time and things you tasted at the time and something you touched and how that felt, like it holds everything. And it's when it's trauma based, obviously it's the worst thing for you to have, isn't it? Where did the anxiety come in with it, the general anxiety?
And well, I never ever would have described myself as somebody that was anxious, and you would never know to look at me. You never know much to look at me, to be honest. I am excellent at looking all put together. A bit to the extent that I looked put together as and will push and push and push myself through a situation or through a work thing or having to do life and collapse and crumble at the end of it, but nobody sees that bit of it. The anxiety I kind of eventually recognized just a few years ago, I suppose, because the anxiety symptoms were overwhelming, the palpitations, the worry, the anxiety about situations, stopping doing things because I was anxious about it, not wanting to go out and socialize as much. And I mean, COVID didn't help that.
No.
But I think I've always had the anxiety going on and I've just coped with it incredibly well. I created a lot of coping mechanisms and routines. And as long as I understood something, that helped me. If I knew, like, here's a plan for this. But if that plan changed, then I would struggle. You wouldn't know though. But I would quickly be working my brain 100 miles an hour to try and figure out a new strategy for, oh, here's the plan for this.
Mm-hmm.
That's where people think, oh, you get really controlling and things like that. But that lack of trying to grasp some sort of control of a situation, hopefully I haven't it hasn't been a situation where I've put that control onto other people, but it's me. As long as I can control what I'm doing in a situation, how I can cope with it and what I've got to do in that situation, which made me incredibly organized on one hand, which is helpful, especially in my job and things. But then it can go to the extreme and then your brain just gets fried with it all and exhausted. So yeah, they put on, yeah, I did that onto the list. Which again, I still wouldn't, I kind of struggle to say, yeah, I'm an anxious person because it doesn't feel like me. A lot of it doesn't feel like me.
Yeah.
What you can do is do your best in that situation. Do you have, for moments like that, I don't know if you've done it in therapy, your grounding items? Like I have window putty. Don't ask.
Oh, yeah.
I have window putty. Window putty is my grounding item. The smell of it, the touch of it has a positive memory behind it. And so I don't use it for the little moments. I use it for the bigger moments to quickly bring me into that memory. You don't have to share what it is. I'm just interested if it's something that you have or if you've learned yet, because I have learned from so far doing these podcasts. We've done quite a few mental health ones where some people are able to do these things that I couldn't even think about doing, and then there's others of us that can't. So I find it interesting to find out what strategies you have managed to make for yourself.
I still struggle with grounding. One of the things that did help for a certain time, before I started DBT, the dialectical behavioural therapy, I had got a couple of my CPN managed to get me a couple of sessions with a trauma specialist, and she did a few sessions of EMDR. The kind of lights go in front of you. Now it wasn't anything in depth at all. It was a very basic kind of follow the lights, but it was to find a good grounding place, a safe place. And she's asked me to kind of, you can do it without the flashing lights. It's picturing a place where you feel safe, where you have a good memory. It could be a real place or somewhere that you just make up in your mind that you find is safe and all that. And I had just been down to the beautiful beaches of Dumfries and Galloway.
Ooh.
down near Wigtown. It's a beautiful pebble beach there.
Mhm.
It's sitting in Ian's cave, and I had brought some rocks back, so I used the rock, and it's a kind of earth, wind, water, and fire thing. But so there's a wind, and then I think earth is the next one. So that was me like looking down on the ground, and I had this pebble that I'd picked up from the beach, and so spending time looking at the ground, seeing where you were, grounding yourself in it, holding that pebble and having that reinforcing the earth bit. The water is simply just to take a sip of water, or even if you've got just like swallow a little bit. Apparently, I can't remember, it does help to reinforce the whole thing. And then fire is your imagination, so it's then sitting in that place and watching the clouds go by, or seeing the water coming back and forward, kind of seeing the pitch, being in the place. So that was really helpful at first. I kind of got out of practice of that, I suppose, but I also got a really good tool from, again, another, the trauma therapy had, my therapist had asked trauma therapy for some help, because DBT doesn't always take into account trauma reactions and how you process them, and that's been my biggest struggle with dialectical behavioural therapy, is bringing the trauma element into it and validating that at the same time as trying to use the DBT skills to function in life. But she said, I got a book called The Compassionate Mind Trauma Therapy, and it helps you write a little script. So if I wake up in the middle of the night with a nightmare flashback, I've got this little script at the side of my bed, that I'm trying to remember what it says in it, but it grounds you. So it says, I am here in my bedroom. I can see the art on my wall. I can feel the cotton sheets. I'm here right now. I'm not in the past. I'm not in danger anymore. I'm safe in this place. That's the kind of gist of it. And it just goes through that little script, and it's got it there written for you, because otherwise you forget. And I've got one that's a little bit different for like during the day, if I get triggered during the day, and I can just read it and take a few minutes to say, okay, I'm here, it's this date, I'm in my car, I can see these things going on. Just to kind of ground you and place yourself in the place, the here and now again.
Like pulls your senses back into focus kind of thing, doesn't it?
So I find those scripts kind of really quite helpful. And I mean, at the end of the day, you don't have to follow the script. You just use whatever grounding techniques you find are easiest, but reminding yourself, especially if it's a trigger or a traumatic thing, a memory that's a trauma response that's happening, I'm panicking and I'm not entirely sure why, that script reminds you, you're here now, you're not in the past, you're not in danger, there's no threat, you can do something about this, you can feel safe here just now.
I actually wanted to ask, could you briefly just explain what DBT is? And I also wondered if you had ever had CBT, just for a comparison between what the two are like, if you have an experience of that.
Yes. Now, I was talking about that with somebody the other day, and I'm going to forget it, but I did have CBT as a teenager.
Okay.
To a certain extent. So cognitive behavioural therapy focuses on, there's a behaviour, your anxiety, say, is your main issue, and it's you're not able to go out and be amongst people because your anxiety is around being around too much people or getting trapped and these kind of things. And the CBT seems to look at tools that can help change that behavior and give you like tools to be able to, it's been such a long time since I looked at it, to be honest, but tools that you can, little things you can do to start changing that behavior and start to be able to do the things that you want to be able to do. But it's very much focused on the behavior and a little bit of your thought pattern, then how that leads to behavior, and then how that leads to what going out and doing what you want to be able to do. Whereas dialectical behavioural therapy heavily focuses on emotional regulation. So like in my mind, my emotions swing quite dramatically, and I struggle to be able to regulate my emotions because in my case, because I might be having a trauma response to something that's triggered me, and my emotions go, whew. Now, a lot of the time I'll be sitting in front of my therapist and I'll be saying, I don't feel anything. She's like, how are you feeling right now, Ruth? I was like, nothing. She says, Ruth, there's tears going down your cheeks. And I was like, all right. So, but that's a bit of dissociation, I suppose. But so DBT focuses on one, recognizing what your emotions are, or even just what emotions are, and then validating the ones that you think you start experiencing. And to be honest, it took me like a year to start identifying what kind of emotions I was having, and how I experienced them, how I experienced fear, or how I experienced anxiety. And then it gives you tools to be able to, rather than swinging up and down to an extreme anxiety or really low depression, like it to help you modulate them down so they're more regulated and easier to manage and identify, which then helps you change behavior.
Right.
So, like, I mean, DBT a lot, it focuses a lot on like destructive behavior, they call it, like self-harm and things like this, or it might be alcoholism or anything, drug addictions, anything like this. But also just things like not going out and spending time with people and all that. So by identifying the emotions, validating, huge amount of validation over that, and then learning how to cope with those emotions, how to regulate them, you can then start looking at how your behavior matches what's the best behavior to do to deal with those things.
Yeah.
And there's loads of you learn skills and skills and skills. There's a whole textbook on it. And you learn different, like doing pros and cons of a certain situation, and being able to do pros and cons of, should I do this or do that? Depends on you being able to know what emotion you're experiencing.
Yeah.
Maybe not so much of the why always, but it's helpful though. And in my case, most of the time it's a trauma reaction. And then being able to tackle, being able to do the things again that make your life worth living.
Right.
Yeah.
It sounds all great. And in practice, it feels like chaos.
Well, I get that, because even just, talking about your journey and how long it's taken you to even just begin to even think about processing what happened in the past, it just shows how long of a recovery process it is for mental health. And I think there's still so much stigma that, I'll just get over it, or it's just this, or it's just, and it always comes back to this. I suppose it's a physical thing as well as mental illness, but it's your story is such an indicator for how long of a journey and how important it is you take that journey in the right way, because there could be so many simple setbacks that put you right back to square one, and it's taking it slowly and at your own pace. And something as simple as understanding what an emotion is, because you learn what an emotion is as a child, and that's really all it is. You kind of take that for granted, that you're told this is fear, this is happiness, this is sadness. You don't ever go back and revisit what that actually means to you, really.
And I think because I had experienced a certain amount of trauma as a very young child, I had shut down my emotions. You can't shut down your emotions. They're going on there whether you realize it or not. But I had shut down that connection to recognizing what they were.
Suppress them.
Yeah, and to be able to identify and cope with them. Not like I was going to say normally, but it's not, in a healthy way, or just be able to cope with them. That doesn't put your life in danger.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but I mean, on one hand, COVID has been helpful to me in one sense, because I started DBT just kind of a couple of weeks before COVID lockdown started. And thankfully with dialectical behavioural therapy, you get a therapist and you have weekly appointments with them. You also have weekly group therapy, and then you also have phone coaching. So in the purest sense of the form, you get phone coaching 24/7, but it doesn't happen in an NHS because they don't have that kind of resource. But there's always my therapist to phone. I mean, the DBT didn't happen in its fullest during lockdown at all. But I did have contact with somebody once a week to be able to keep myself afloat.
Yeah.
But it took all that time and the extended periods of kind of getting ready for therapy and processing things and all that, for me to be able to start figuring out what I had to do.
Yeah.
And also deciding that I wanted to do it.
So just something I had written down as a question of mine. It's maybe something I need to Google instead, but I just wondered if, Ruth, you knew the difference or any of the differences between complex trauma or PTSD and generalized PTSD.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, no, I don't know the exact answer. As far from what I've seen written in my notes, it's been described as complex trauma, and then some people also call it complex PTSD. I think it's a little bit interchangeable, those two terms.
Okay.
But I might be wrong. Don't quote me on that. But from PTSD, my understanding in my case, it's because there's been several kind of traumatic incidents on, and then in some people there may have been a much more prolonged traumatic experience that they've been living in their home environment, something like that. With me, there's been a couple of key things that have happened, and then I've ended up it being my brain has processed it as trauma, which they were, but
it's actually something I was actually Googling earlier because I found it quite interesting, because I myself suffer PTSD, so I wondered what the difference was in the two and how it's treated and stuff. So I actually did look into that one, I think more than all the others, and the diagnosis for it is obviously, as Ruth said, more than one trauma, but it's also to do with more symptoms than just the PTSD people have. I've actually got a list here of things like they find it hard to control their emotions, very distrustful of the world, not just people, but the world in general, often feel empty and hopelessness, feeling completely different to everybody else in the world, feeling like no one understands them, avoids friendships, has dissociative disorders, dissociative moments, suffers with headaches, dizziness, chest pains, and the worst one in my eyes is wanting to unlive themselves quite regularly. If they have the feeling of wanting to unlive themselves quite regularly, which is heartbreaking to have read. But
just listening to that list, it reminds me of it's a lot of those symptoms there are very similar to the ones for EUPD and BPD, which is why some people get misdiagnosed, or actually the trauma isn't identified. Like in my case, the trauma wasn't identified when I was first diagnosed.
Right.
So it was only later on when I was able to communicate the traumas that they then went, this is definitely, you're not coping with this because in this way, because of these different trauma reactions are coming through. I remember once being in hospital after a crisis, and I overheard one of the most difficult. I've had amazing treatment from the community mental health team that I have here, but in the hospital you come across all sorts. And whatever doctor was on the round that morning after I had a crisis, I overheard him talking to the nurse during handover, and I think I was described as somebody who's she's just chronically suicidal. So and all I heard was that, and there wasn't a huge amount. And I know these handovers are very factual and something like that, but basically they weren't needing to do anything because that's just how I was. That was just how I chose to deal with things. Unfortunately, it wasn't really how I chose it. It was the way that my brain And that's never, I said, I'm just recovering from COVID. And just last week, I was so struck. I mean, we hear all the time, and I say all the time, mental illness is a huge vulnerability when it's compounded with physical health or physical illness and things. And you hear it all the time, and everybody goes, yes, yes, of course. But it only hit me last week when I started feeling unwell with COVID. I didn't realize it was COVID at that point, and I was just feeling awful. And I could not get my head out of this thick darkness. It's not a choice. It's not oh, this is what I think about myself. It just consumes your whole head. And the darkness was horrific. I was on the phone to my therapist, but I don't think I was listening to her, to be honest. But it was only later that, I mean, I was way down the rabbit hole. I was way down in the darkness. Did not see any way out. And it wasn't until about 11:30 that night, I think, I decided to do a COVID test, and I realized I had COVID. And almost instantly, I still felt dreadful, but just having that realization that I was actually I was physically ill, and that had compounded. I had therapy that day, and there'd been a couple of triggers. So all those things together led me down a road where I could have very easily got so lost if I didn't have the support around me at the time. But people would quite often just see that as, oh, she's just choosing not to cope, or she's not doing enough to be able to try and pull herself out. These are the things I think people are thinking, which is a judgment, I know, but it's been backed up by what I've heard from some people.
That's it. You're not just jumping those conclusions for no reason. And I think that's so often, again, this comes back to other people have talked about this. We've heard this so many times from people, that doctors are so quick to jump the gun a lot of the time, and they just, because they've become so desensitized to so many things, they see so much every day, and there are people out there who maybe do abuse the system, but for doctors to just jump to that conclusion and become so desensitized is just really sad, when there's people who really do need the help and just need to be listened to, rather than just an assumption being made about them.
I mean, I've experienced that experience just last week really rung home to me how vulnerable I can be to that kind of situation. And it's only through going through it, I guess, and learning it, and me being able to talk to my therapist about it and realizing that's what was happening. It doesn't change how my head felt, but just that bit of realization helped with a tiny bit of grounding, enough grounding that I needed to be able to get through that night.
Yeah.
I know, I mean, I've had wonderful doctors who have just said, what can we do to help? What is it that you would find helpful just now? These kind of things. So it was one of the times I had been in hospital. A lovely student nurse was with me, and I took the opportunity. They had asked me a couple of questions like how I was, and I was like, I don't really know if I want to talk to you for very long. But anyway, they were there for a while, so I decided to educate them on how you deal with people who are struggling with trauma, and these kind of diagnoses of EUPD or complex trauma. And when I feel able to, I always, it's educating everybody and anybody on how to be more trauma informed, because I think if society as a whole understands, and medical professionals in particular, can learn to appreciate and understand how somebody with a trauma background might present, and what things can be helpful and what aren't helpful. I mean, we've all experienced unhelpful things from medical professionals, and we've experienced some really helpful things. But I know I noticed quite early on that some of the things I really struggled if people told me you have to do it this way and you have to do it that way when it came to therapy and things, or different practices like mindfulness and stuff. But I was getting trauma symptoms breaking through when I was trying to do mindfulness, and they're just telling me, no, you have to do it this way because this is what mindfulness is. And I'm like, but that's making it worse. We need to work together somehow to find a way that I can do this that doesn't exacerbate the trauma symptoms and the trauma things that come through. And I found, came across the There's a UK group, UK personality disorder group, and there's also a Scottish one, and I've been at their conference, like online and Zoom last year, and there was a couple of practitioners from Edinburgh who were doing trauma-informed yoga. I just had like a little workshop on, and I thought, oh, I'll go and have a look at that. I've never done yoga. It's never really been something I've been interested in. But I thought, oh, I heard trauma-informed, and I thought, I'm going to that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I can't remember the names now. It's the Edinburgh Community Yoga. But the way, it wasn't even so much the practice of yoga. Yeah, yoga can help relax you and can help ground you. But that was almost secondary to what I was hearing from them in terms of a teaching or approaching people in a trauma-informed lens approach. And once you hear it from them, it's so simple, but things like not trying to coerce you into doing something their way, saying, here's the options for you. If you'd like to try this, if you'd like to try that, and not making a hierarchy of, well, if you want to do the yoga position like this, if you're not able to, you can do it seated in this.
Mm-hmm.
But that's putting a kind of hierarchy in, saying, well, that way is not quite as good as that way. And so taking that element out and just saying, you can try it this way, or you can try it this way. You can have your eyes open or you can close them. It's giving you complete control over how you work with it and how you can evolve and get the most out of it for you. Because if you're trying to do things that are triggering you, then there's no point in trying to do it, because you're just, it defeats the purpose. So things like that, and making the group more of an authentic group, sharing the experience, not like sharing personal stories and that, but sharing it as a group. Mm-hmm. Even though we're on Zoom, there were some people in the hall, and making it much more of a group thing, which I think also kind of helps ground. I found that a bit threatening, because I don't like letting people know that I'm feeling vulnerable, or I'm that's one of my big things. Mm-hmm. But on Zoom it's a bit easier to hide. But it's one of those kind of things you get used to. So just encouraging people to be more authentic, to make the choices that were right for them, to get in touch with how your own body was feeling. So if your body was feeling, oh, that's a bit sore, I'm not going to do as much that way or this way. But that also helps me then being able to realize, oh, so that movement's a bit sore for me, and being able to identify that also helps me sometimes to translate that skill over to, wait a minute, I'm feeling something that's not quite right at the moment. What is it? How am I feeling that?
So you can increase your self-awareness.
Yeah, increasing, absolutely, being aware of interoception, I think it's called, being aware of your body and sensations that are going on, and taking away the hierarchy of the group completely. The teacher isn't the teacher. We're there as a group on the same level. They do work with units in hospitals, or addictions units, women's aid, things like this. And if staff are coming in, they take part in it. And everybody, there's not different levels, like we're the staff and we're teaching you. Everybody takes part as their own individual and as a group.
So that's really equals.
Yeah. And they're always reinforcing, this is your yoga, this is your time. It's, you do it the way that's right is the way that works for you. Right. This way, it's not a right way and a wrong way. Whatever works for you is the way, the right way for you to do it. And it seems so simple, but I often come across therapists or people that say, here's a skill, do it this way. Here's a coping strategy, do this way. Mm-hmm. And I do quite like to challenge. When I first started DBT, there's a thing called the 24-hour rule. Mm-hmm. And it means if you've self-harmed or something like that, you're not allowed to phone for coaching for 24 hours after you've done it, because they see it as you've already solved the problem. So there's no point asking them for coaching help. Okay. On one hand, I understand that. But then my team also said that it meant that you also couldn't come to an appointment if you'd self-harmed within 24 hours. And I was like, no, that doesn't sound right, because surely that's keeping people away from the therapy that they need.
Yeah.
That they're going to. And they give them their dues. At first they're like, no, that's the rule. And I was like, no, this isn't right. It's not right. And I got on my high horse a little bit. But I went to Twitter and I found the trainer who trains all the DBT therapists in the British Isles, and asked the question, and asked a couple of other people that I knew that were therapists on Twitter. And they came back with here on this page of the textbook it says this, and this, here's this bit. And the trainer said, in no circumstances, no circumstances should a patient not be allowed to come to a one-to-one appointment or a group therapy appointment because of self-harm or anything like this. And they changed their policy.
Wow.
Yeah. So if something's not right, but it takes an awful lot to be able to feel that. But they had given their dues. They had validated me so much that I felt I could.
Yeah.
They created that kind of setting and the environment that I felt that I could challenge it. Yeah. And I'm sure I challenge my therapist regularly, even though I'm not. It's not actually, and she challenges me back. I've got a good bit of stubbornness about me.
That's a good one to have, though.
Absolutely. But that language, for the first couple of months of DBT therapy, I printed out every article that I found on trauma-informed language and trauma-informed approaches. And it's not rocket science. It's just compassion. It's validation. It's everybody on an equal footing. It's allowing people to process and do things that in a way that is helpful for them, is their.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask.
Is unique.
Sorry.
No.
I was actually going to ask, just from you mentioned the trauma-informed yoga, is there something in general that you would suggest that somebody listening to this could be more trauma-informed themselves? What would be like maybe just one big thing that they could be aware of going forward that they could do to help somebody who may be dealing with trauma?
A lot of the time, I think you probably don't realize that somebody is dealing with trauma.
Yeah.
If you come across someone and their behavior's difficult or challenging, that kind of thing. I've been called difficult, I've been called challenging, I've been called willful. But I think it's just look up adverse childhood experiences. There's quite a lot of information of it online, and it talks that's where I started learning about trauma and being trauma informed. So adverse ACEs, it's called adverse childhood experiences, is where there's about 10 categories of different kind of traumatic events that could happen, mental, physical, that kind of thing. And if you have 4 or more of those, then you're more likely to develop different mental illnesses, but also physical illnesses. There's a huge amount of research that was done on it that shows if you've had suffered neglect or suffered divorce in your family, or these kind of different, losing a family member, different things, if they kind of compound together and make you much more likely to have mental illness difficulties or physical things like heart attacks and strokes and all this can be linked to adverse childhood experiences. So just getting an understanding of that and what people may have gone through, even though you don't know what it is, having an awareness that's can bring all sorts of difficulties for people, and then looking up things on trauma-informed approaches. There's quite a lot of research on it now, and YouTube videos on trauma-informed things.
So I think that's all we have time for tonight. Like, we've gone into so much detail and educated not only me, I'm sure Hayley could say the same, like on so many levels. I didn't even know some of this like even existed. So I really can't thank you enough for that, and thank you honestly for going into as much detail as you did. I think that raising awareness, you really have to sometimes dig deep, and you really did. So thank you so much for it. But before we do leave, is there anything that you'd like to share? Social media, charities or anything?
No, thank you both too, because I was quite anxious about it, but you made it easy. Maybe easy, maybe it wasn't quite so easy. You made it manageable. And it's always good to laugh in amongst all the intenseness.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you guys. You've made it really easy to do. I've given you links. The charity that is close to my heart at the moment is the Stirling is an area near me, Stirling Rape Crisis Centre, who I know has helped several people that I'm close to through situations, and they're a great charity. They work with MD at whatever stage you're at. They just meet people where they are and take them along the bit of the journey that they need to help with. So yeah, that's the charity that I have sent the links for, and I think I've sent the links for some trauma-informed information and things people can, if they want to look out and find more information and learn more.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks for those, Ruth, and we'll put all those on the website, and if you're watching on YouTube, it'll be in the description box down below as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I guess on that note, we wish you the best. Please do keep in touch. Obviously you will. I'm so used to saying
after this I'm not entirely sure. I learned a few things about you that I'm just not sure about anymore.
It was the brown sauce, wasn't it? It was the brown sauce.
The lack of context for any listeners is going to be fantastic.
Sorry.
I'm so used to saying asking them to keep in touch and give us an update on their journeys, because obviously a lot of them we've never met before. So but as always, please keep in touch with me, even about after the brown sauce comment. And yeah, I'll probably talk to you later anyway. But thank you so much again for being part of this journey.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Take care.
See you soon, Ruth. Bye.
Waving over Zoom. Bye-bye.
Bye. Oh my God, I love her.
Oh, Ruth's brilliant.
I was so nervous about that, like so nervous because of how deep it was going to be, and my anxieties at one point like got really high, but then we got into it, and I think she had prepared herself and really thought about how deep she wanted to go and how much she wanted to share, but doing it in a way that she still managed to educate. I'm so grateful for that. So grateful that she wanted to do that and was able to do that, because her journey is so traumatic that
it is. Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head with that point. I mean, for me as well, I was the same as you, coming into this really nervous, just not sure what we could say that could potentially trigger her as well. So it was just trying to make sure that we pitched it at the right level too. But she came in with such clear idea of where she wanted to go with it, that it made it that much easier, for us all.
I guess she kind of gave us a roadmap when she came in, and which made it easy for us to follow. And I think that it helped us be respectful and keep it within the boundaries.
Yeah,
I think that that's something super important, like not just for podcasts, but in life in general, that you should respect people's boundaries, find out what they are and respect them. And sometimes we do want to know more to help, but until people are ready, you've got to respect their boundaries. And I guess that could be the spoonful of knowledge that we give today, to respect the boundaries of others. Even if you will have the best intentions and want to help the best you can, the only way you can do that is to respect the person that you want to help, or that you're talking with at the time.
I agree.
Today,
because it's hard whenever you only know your own boundaries. It can be hard to see it from another person's point of view, and maybe see that other people can have different boundaries and different levels of what they deem acceptable. So just trying to be open and aware that other people might have different boundaries, and just we're not always going to get it right, but just being aware that you're trying your best. That's what really matters.
Absolutely, and just be there.
Just be there.
That's what we done today. We sat and we listened and asked gentle questions to guide where she wanted to go.
Yeah.
And I can quite clearly say that I've been educated tonight.
Yeah, as always. Yeah, I have been too. It's
And I have utmost respect for Ruth.
very much so. So on that note,
Spoonies, we will see you again in 2 weeks.
Mhm.
And it's a bye from me.
and it's a bye from me.
Bye.
Bye.